Hey, so today we're going to be talking about hygiene. For me, this is a topic that is of extreme importance, and it's kind of disturbing to see how many artists, also great artists, actually do not know what they're doing. And I'm really hoping here that I'm not offending anybody, because I know that it can be a fragile subject if somebody's doing something wrong. My attention is not to call out people who do things wrong. I just want to share knowledge, because I believe it's a much safer, better place for all of us if we actually know what we're doing. One wrong move can actually contaminate your entire studio, put all your staff in danger, as well as all the clients visiting the studio. Not only that, but worst case scenario, you might bring something home with you and actually infect one of your loved ones. Doing the right thing will even have an impact outside of your studio, because many artists, as you grow, as you develop, many artists will start looking up to you, and they're going to look at the ways you're working. The earlier we can set things straight and get all of you on the right path, the better. What I'm seeing in our industry is so crazy. To me, it's kind of the same as somebody going to eat out and they see a small hair in their food and they freak out, because it's unhygienic. But after that, they go and lick a public toilet. It's just like the stuff I see, it makes no sense. And I'm fairly sure that 99% of it because people don't know better. And a lot of it is also because people assume it's okay. They see other people do bad things, and because they see it's being done, they just don't think with their own brain. They just blindly follow what they see. And this is not to blame any artist. My intention here is to possibly wake up your brain to start thinking for yourself. First of all, sharing knowledge, and then letting your brain activate and start thinking for itself. Because we cannot continue being sheep in our industry, just blindly following what other people do. We need to come to the realization that not everybody knows what they're doing. I also suggest you read the following disclaimer, because I cannot take full responsibility of stuff like this, because I am not a licensed medical practitioner. Here's the disclaimer. Take a few seconds or minutes to read it through. You can pause the video and then we can continue. Alright, so my first point is that many artists have come to believe that if there's no blood visible or no dirt visible, that it's not dirty. Now, this is the first mindset that we need to absolutely change. For an infection to occur, we don't need traces of blood that are actually visible to the eye. Blood-borne pathogens are so small that we simply can't see them with our bare eyes. But they're still there, and they're very dangerous. Let me rephrase that. They're not dangerous if we do the right things and have the correct safety measures in place. I would also argue that there are way more infections, there are way more diseases passed around, and there are way more health risks involved in what we're doing than people actually know. Now, many artists, they could have worked for 10 years and they're doing a lot of mistakes, and they have no idea that they might have infected a lot of people. Because not all of these clients or people who might get a disease, such as, let's say, hepatitis, for example, they might not realize where it came from. It might never get traced back to that specific tattoo artist or studio. And for many of these diseases that can occur, some of the symptoms might show up only years later. So it's not that easily traceable either. Some of these clients could have 40 tattoos. How do they trace which one it actually came from? I want to also let all of you guys know that there are cases where people have actually died from getting tattoos. So we need to be very well aware of what we're doing. And if you're working for 10 years like this and you have no cases of anything happening, you create a belief that everything you're doing is perfectly fine and exactly correct because nothing has happened yet, right? So this is a very dangerous belief to have, and the worst thing is that it's very contagious. As I said earlier, people might look up to many artists who have been tattooing for 10 years. And if they pick up on these tendencies, they can pick up on some very, very bad tendencies. So we need to be responsible enough. At least I would invite all of you to take the responsibility. Let's start leading by example together. So this is going to be kind of a hygiene 101, just the basics. But anyway, it's a good start for most of you, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of things that not all of you are aware of, and a lot of you will pick up some better habits. So let's introduce a new word for some of you, maybe not for all of you, but blood-borne pathogens. I would hope that this is not a very new word for most of you, but anyway, blood-borne pathogens refers to infectious microorganisms that can be present in the blood. Some can live longer on surfaces and some die faster. Now a few ways of transmitting is direct contact, then we got indirect contact, an open wound coming in contact with a surface that is dirty. There can actually be fairly dangerous pathogens in the saliva as well. Now I'm sure there's a lot of people also who are absolutely against masks, and you have all the right to be, but I'm just sharing information. I'm just sharing what can happen. So one way to protect your client is to wear a mask when you're tattooing, especially if you're going to be talking, because the amount of spit that flies out of your mouth when you're speaking is insane. Now, I just want to share one example, and this is again not to force anybody to wear a mask or anything like that. You are all entitled to do all your own decisions. I'm simply sharing information. So I'm not for or against any opinion. I'm just sharing facts and information. Now I believe it was 2 years ago when a young girl in Finland, she had a knee surgery. Actually it was just a really small cut they made in her knee to fix a small thing. One of the doctors did not wear a mask. She died from an infection in the wound, which was directly linked to the doctor not wearing a mask. So I'm just telling, it might seem harmless, and maybe chances are small to slim that something bad happens, but I'm just sharing facts. Now, as we're tattooing, we place ourselves at risk always because we come in contact with bodily fluids of our client. Second, we're always putting our clients at risk as well, because when we're tattooing, we're causing puncture wounds and we're breaking the protective layer of the skin, creating a free access point for pathogens to enter the body. See, the skin protects our body from the outside environment. As soon as we break the skin, our body is prone and at risk for being infected by these pathogens. Now, as said, some of these pathogens can stay alive for quite a long time, or maybe alive is the wrong word, because viruses we don't actually classify as being alive, but they can stay active for a longer time. So for example, hepatitis B can stay active in dried blood for almost a week. Now this means that multiple things that come into contact with these bodily fluids can actually carry active pathogens on them for a longer time. Now this might include your machine, clip cord, workstation, whatever you have. That's why it's very important to protect all your surfaces and all your equipment from actually being in contact with bodily fluids. And those pieces that do come into contact with bodily fluid, I would strongly suggest to opt for single-use items. And if it can't be protected, or you simply can't use a single-use product for that specific thing, then you need to be having a sterilization method available at your studio to make sure that all of the pathogens are inactivated. Even when surfaces and equipment are protected, I would strongly suggest to disinfect them and clean them properly between all uses. There's other access points to the body than just wounds. So even touching a surface that is contaminated, let's say for example with 5 days old Hep B, we don't know. So let's say it's your door handle or whatever that came into contact with any small droplets of blood. Now if you touch this area and you rub your eye, ta-da, you might get Hep. So now you might understand the importance of being very well aware of where you're touching, what you're contaminating, and also you're understanding that you don't necessarily even need a wound to get an infection. That's why I want to suggest for people using their phone and touching their phone while they're tattooing, if you have any kids or anything, you know you can put them at risk as well. So again, it's your choice. I'm just sharing information. Now regarding glove use, many people think that gloves are an absolute protection for your hands. Gloves tend to have small pinholes, and small traces of blood might access through the gloves. Therefore, it's extremely important that once you remove your gloves, you actually wash your hands with running water and soap. Now, if you don't have access to running water and soap at that specific point in time, which you actually should have if you're working in a good tattoo studio, but let's say you don't, then a hand sanitizer will be sufficient to start with. But as soon as you have access to running water and soap, you should wash your hands properly to minimize the risk of contaminating other surfaces or yourself. And for those of you who use latex gloves, if you're using any petroleum-based ointments, I would strongly suggest to change your gloves, because petroleum will eat through the latex quite fast. Now, in my experience, most artists do understand the importance of wearing clean gloves, using clean needles, sterile needles, protecting their machine, protecting their workstation, etc. But the thing where I feel like a majority of artists do make a lot of mistakes is in cross-contamination, not being aware of where they touch with dirty gloves or when they make their clean gloves dirty before touching the client's skin. So, in its nutshell, cross-contamination is very easy. Imagine, for simplicity's sake, let's say that you're wearing gloves, clean gloves, but you have a piece of shit on the floor. Now, if you touch that shit, your gloves are not clean anymore, right? Yes, right. Now, if you already have shit on the gloves, if you touch a door handle, now that door handle also has shit, right? So in the same way, blood and pathogens also spread. So you need to activate your brain and be very mindful of when you have dirty gloves. So as soon as your gloves are contaminated with blood, even if you cannot see it, but if there's a chance of them having blood on them, you should not be touching any surfaces that are supposed to be clean. And also remembering that when you're touching your client, you don't want to have any outside dirt on your gloves. So this naturally means that you should also wash your hands well before you put gloves on. Because if you have dirty hands, let's again, for simplicity's sake, say you have shit on your hands. And you pick up a pair of gloves and put them on. Now, I can with quite a high certainty say that the outside of the gloves will also have some shit particles on them. And now if you're going to be touching your client, it's not enough that you already cleaned their skin and disinfected their skin. If you have shit on your gloves because you didn't have clean hands when you picked up your gloves, you're again putting your client at risk. Now, I don't know how to make it simpler, so I'm going to show this little simple picture where we have the red circles I refer to as contaminated areas, and the gray circles I refer to as not contaminated areas. If one object is contaminated with blood and it touches an uncontaminated object, the uncontaminated object will become contaminated, and so forth. It's very, very simple actually. Just got to be aware of it, yeah? And I really, really invite you to start paying attention. Like, wake up from zombie mode, please. And I'm not saying that you specifically that I'm not now talking to, but if you feel in your heart that you have maybe been sleeping a little bit and not paying attention to these things, then activate your brain, please. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but just wake up from the zombie mode and start paying attention. It's very, very simple. Doesn't require a lot. You'll be a much better artist for that. Your clients will be safer. You will be much more professional. I'm going to be sharing also some examples of what not to do, just to show examples. And I think we can go more deeper into these discussions and also discuss why certain things shouldn't be done, just to make it clearer for everybody. I think these are always good topics to discuss. There's no reason to ever store your gloves on the workstation. Even if the workstation is clean, you might contaminate the workstation. Or if the workstation is dirty, you will contaminate your gloves. Never adjust your headphones with gloves. If your gloves are clean, you might do it, but then you have to change your gloves immediately after. Never adjust your face mask with your gloves. Never adjust the lighting with your gloves. Whatever you touch will contaminate the gloves, or the gloves will contaminate it. If you need to adjust your light, I suggest covering it. This should go without saying, but if you're dropping anything on the floor and you need to pick it up, do not keep using the same gloves after that. Gloves are cheap and there's no reason to put your client at risk just to save a few pennies. Do not shave and clean your client's arm on the armrest, as it might contaminate the armrest. Only after cleaning it, you may place the arm on the armrest. After disinfecting, do not touch the same area with the glove you touched any product with. After shaving, throw your razor in the bin. Do not grab anything with the same glove anymore, as you may contaminate it. After shaving, there might be traces of blood on top of the skin. As the skin will have small cuts, that's why the alcohol burns. Don't contaminate your workstation with placing any items there that should not be stored there, such as markers. All markers should always be single use. As you have just shaved, there might be traces of blood on the skin and you will contaminate the marker. Also, never draw without gloves. There's no reason for it, thus contaminating your fingers from the blood of your client or contaminating their skin. Please don't touch your phone with gloves. If you do, make sure they're clean gloves, and after that throw them away. Yes, I've seen people blow into their gloves and it's absolutely crazy. I've even seen people reuse the same gloves. Do not touch door handles, keys, anything like that. Just to share a few words also and some misconceptions out there. So the difference between sanitation and sterilization. Sanitation means that we're reducing the amount of microorganisms on a surface to levels that we consider safe. Sterilization means total elimination of all pathogens. And cleaning versus disinfecting. Cleaning means that we're removing dirt from surfaces, right? While disinfecting means that we're killing or inactivating microorganisms. I'm not going to go deep into sterilization methods in this Hygiene 101 because I feel like there are very good single-use options for almost all equipment that come in contact with bodily fluids. If you choose to use something that's not single-use, as said earlier, you should become very familiar with dry heat sterilization, autoclaves, so on. Now, there's a lot of light boxes out there also that use UV light, but the problem is that most of the equipment that we would like to sterilize, they might be of forms such as a grip where the light cannot penetrate inside the grip, which is actually the most dirty area that we would like to sterilize. So therefore, I find that these light or UV light sterilization options are not the best go-to if you want to sterilize your equipment. Another mistake that I see a lot of artists doing is already at the prepping stage, when they're preparing their client's skin or when they're preparing their workstation. Now I'm gonna be putting out a video on prepping your workstation, what to do, and also what not to do. I'm also aware of a lot of artists who just throw their needles in the trash, and this is kind of irresponsible also, because for whoever is picking up the trash, they might get puncture wounds. You should always use sharps containers to get rid of your needles. Never throw them in the trash. This is really shitty towards the people taking out the trash and touching it or handling it in any way or form. It's also important that whatever equipment you're storing, that you're storing in a safe way. So, for example, what I see a lot of is people, especially when they're traveling to conventions, you know, they have a lot of ink bottles and stuff, and it's all there between their dirty underwear and everything. Like, if you get dirt on top of the ink bottles, there's a very, very big chance that it also finds its way into the ink bottle, and these microorganisms can start growing there. And if not, even if you only have it on the top of the surface, chances of you contaminating the workspace while adding ink to your ink cups is much larger. as well as maybe when you're pouring the ink, that even if the ink inside the ink bottle isn't contaminated, maybe some parts of dirt or shit particles fall into your ink cap. So I would be very considerate also of how you're storing your equipment, especially the stuff that you're hoping to be clean. A quick word about skin preparation also is, before you start tattooing and before you start shaving, make sure to always use disinfectant, skin disinfectant, because we also want to kill the microbes living on top of the skin of your client before we actually put the needle in the skin and puncture the skin. We don't want to take all the microorganisms living on top of the skin and take them into the bloodstream via a puncture wound. I would also strongly advise against putting on stencils without gloves or drawing freehand without gloves, because unless you have very, very clean hands, and even if you have very clean hands, you shouldn't do it. I'll tell you the reasons. First of all, if you don't have clean hands,